Xavier Becerra, Chairman of the House Democratic Caucus, joined by my colleague and friend from Colorado, DeGette, who's been one of our leaders on so many different issues from health care to women's rights, who was also one of those who participated in today's caucus, and we will discuss a number of important issues. But first, let me begin by saying that we had Secretary Sylvia Burwell from the Department of Health and Human Services with us. She made a very eloquent and in-depth presentation on several subjects, but principally focused on the issue of the humanitarian crisis at the border with the children who are at the border and the treatment of those individuals, and trying to continue to move forward as the White House and this administration enforces the law. A couple of points on that. I think many of us understand that when you're talking about children, very different from how you would act and how you would treat adults. And that does make it a more difficult circumstance for us. But we've always, as a country, taken it upon ourselves to prove that we are an example for the world when it comes to those who are refugees or those seeking asylum, or simply children who are desperate and trying to flee violence and threat of life. We find that the administration has moved swiftly to try to address a humanitarian crisis at the border. Secretary Burwell gave a report on how the administration is processing, according to the law, those children so that we can determine what their final course of action will be. And in many cases, those children will likely qualify to be able to stay in this country under a request for asylum. In some cases, some of those individuals may be repatriated to their home country. In either case, the administration early on came forward with a package presented to Congress to try to resolve this as quickly as possible under the terms of our laws and respecting the fact of human rights and the need for these children to have an opportunity in life in the future, whether back in their home country or, in the case of some of them, here in the United States of America. It strikes some of us as a little odd that this week our colleagues on the Republican side are talking about suing the president because they claim he has not been enforcing the law or has been exceeding the law. And in fact, what we find is that the president is trying to make the law work. In the case of immigration, he has had to try to do what he can within the confines of the law, given that in the House of Representatives, Republicans have refused to allow us to even have a vote on fixing a broken immigration system. When it came to the new health security law that has protected millions of Americans for the first time, once again, this Congress and the House of Representatives has worked to repeal or dismantle those health securities, the security that we now have under the health law, rather than try to help build upon it or perhaps work to fix some aspects that need to be tweaked. We hope that our Republican colleagues will gather their senses, and instead of using taxpayer money to file a lawsuit against the president for doing his work, that we would instead get to work here in the House of Representatives and get to voting on fixing these things. Everything that our Republican colleagues claim they're going to sue on, we could easily take care of by just voting and passing legislation rather than trying to take the president to court. So we hope that rather than suing, we'll start voting and doing our job and not costing the taxpayers some money. My final point is this. Ms. DeGette is about to talk to us a little bit about legislation she's introduced to try to undo a harmful Supreme Court decision, which for any woman in America, and quite honestly, any man in America, should concern us, that the justices, these conservative justices, have decided to go into our private lives and tell women that it's more important to protect the interests and desires of a corporation than it is of a human being. And at this stage, when we have so much to do, that we cannot get things done, like providing women with all the same kind of health security rights that men take for granted, or paying women equally for the same kind of work that a man does, or fixing our broken immigration system. Instead, we're looking at a House of Representatives under Republican leadership that's talking about suing the president because House of Representatives have not done its job. This is very reminiscent, eerily reminiscent, of the path we saw followed by Republicans in the House when it came to the budget and funding the government to the point where we had a government shutdown back in October of last year. And you hate to sense that we're back on that same course again, where with the government shutdown, the lives of countless millions of Americans were affected. But that's what this seems like when the House of Representatives has decided to use taxpayer money to file a lawsuit against the president, instead of doing what it could through its voting rights to pass laws and make sure that things work the way they should. But hopefully, before too long, we'll gather our senses and get to work and join the president to get things done, fix a broken immigration system, put Americans back to work, get this economy even moving faster, because we want to continue to see the success that we've seen over the last several months. But with that, let me now yield to my colleague and friend, Diana DeGette.
Thank you so much, Chairman Becerra, for inviting me to join you this morning to talk about this important issue. When the chairman talks about we could be voting, one thing we could be voting on is this issue of allowing women to decide what types of family planning they will have under their insurance policies, and not their employers. The Senate will be voting on a bill this week that says employees of closely held corporations will be able to choose the types of family planning that they want, not their employers. And that's really a critical decision for most families in America. So we have introduced legislation in the House. Congresswoman Slaughter, Congressman Nadler, and I have introduced a bill which does what the Supreme Court told us they wanted us to do when, on a 5-4 decision, they said that the employers could exercise their religious objections. The Supreme Court said Congress can fix this. And so we've introduced legislation which simply says, for closely held corporations, the employee gets to decide what types of family planning they have. It's important to note that not only is this important to have insurance cover family planning for family planning purposes, but also for a whole host of other medical reasons. 58% of women who use birth control use it for reasons other than family planning. So this truly is part of a woman's whole health for whatever purpose she's using it. And to be honest, it should be the woman, not her boss, who decides what types of birth control she's going to be using. In the Senate this week, as I said, they will attempt to get cloture on their bill. In the House, we have almost 150 co-sponsors on our legislation, and we will be pursuing a number of procedural motions on the House floor this week to try to persuade our friends on the other side of the aisle to have a vote on our bill. It's a common sense bill. It makes sense for women and families in America, and we hope that it can prevail. We hope that we can vote on it before the August recess. Thank you.
Thank you. Take some questions.
Chairman, regarding the immigration issue, there was a Cuellar-Cornyn compromise supposedly, possibly being worked out. Is it too much to go out on a limb to say that perhaps your caucus may be divided about that idea, about something that might very well speed up the deportation of these children?
We know that there's a bill that's being drafted by both Senator Cornyn and Congressman Cuellar. Haven't seen it yet, so we'll wait to see what it says. I would tell you this, in a caucus which was very well attended, I think most every member would agree that we have to treat this with a serious outlook and treat it quickly, because we're talking about children. And so I believe in the Democratic caucus, there's clear support to work with the president to follow the law, to provide these children with the rights that they are entitled to under the law, but to process this quickly without delay so that we can make determinations based on the best evidence and in the best interest of the children. We'll see where we go. What we're hearing from our Republican colleagues this morning is that they are unwilling to support the president's request for fast action and the resources to make that possible. That would make it difficult, obviously, not just for the administration and for our government to process these kids, but certainly it'll make it tough on the kids. And so we hope that our Republican colleagues will look to join with the president to start acting bipartisanly on this, because we're talking about kids, and I think that's important. Mr. DeGette, I don't know if you wish to comment.
I think the chairman's exactly right.
Yeah.
Becerra,
No, go
the Republicans said that they're not going to try and move a package forward without changes to the 2008 law to treat the children coming in the same as we treat immigrants in Mexico. Is that a non-starter for your caucus to have the combination of the changing the law and the funding combined?
I think most Democrats would tell you that what we don't want to see is to reduce due process rights. We don't want to find ourselves returning children to persecution, human smuggling, human sex trafficking, perhaps death. And so what we want to do is make sure that due process is followed. Anything that undermines due process, I think, would concern most of our Democratic colleagues. And so what we're looking to do is work with the administration and our Republican colleagues to come up with a bipartisan solution. I don't know, Diana, if you want to comment on
The only thing I'll say is that right now, the sense I get from the caucus is right now, people want to make sure that we take care of these kids who are coming in and that we get the resources to do that. And then we can have these other discussions later.
We'll go here.
So it's a little confusing because if the law on how the children are processed, adjudicated, is changed, as long as that law is followed, that's certainly due process because it's due under the law. I mean, so it's a little confusing where you think the caucus actually is. I mean, if the leader, as you know, said this isn't a deal breaker to deal on this issue, do you think that the majority of the caucus is going to be on board to make a compromise with Republicans over this 2008 trafficking issue?
I think the leader made it very clear, and others have made it clear on the Democratic side, that we need a solution. The president acted quickly. Oftentimes he's accused by his adversaries of not acting, which, again, we see is not true. He has taken action swiftly. He's put it in writing. And for those who don't like it, they should put in writing what they would propose in its place. But we don't have a lot of time to waste because you've got 7, 9-year-olds. We have to figure out what to do. And there are a lot of communities throughout America that are wondering what we're going to do as well. And we need to act, and we should do this on a bipartisan basis, if not because they are kids, but because we have the rule of law to uphold. What we do, remember, this is not a law that was generated because members of Congress just said we need a law. This was a law that was generated as a result of a court ruling that found that we had not been treating children with due process rights or providing them with due process rights as we were processing them. And so the law that's in place today is a function of a court ruling saying that we must provide individuals who are minors with certain due process rights. So we want to make sure that we continue to uphold that standard of making sure that children receive their due process rights.
Following up on that, did Secretary Burwell express at all to the conference or the caucus that they needed some kind of leniency in terms of dealing with children from non-contiguous states or countries? Did she express some desire to be able to deal with those children the same that they deal with children from Mexico?
She took a lot of time and took pains to try to really explain the process well, because a number of folks throughout the country are still confused about how we are to handle under the law these kids, and she went through the whole process. She's most concerned about making sure she can continue to work through the population of kids who, after 72 hours within our country, must be transferred over to her agency, from the Department of Homeland Security to the Department of Health and Human Services. I think she's most interested in just making sure that we do this right and that it works, and at the end of the day, we've done the best job we can under the law and in the best interest of the kids. She didn't express a direct opinion on what Congress should do, but she made it very clear. Congress needs to act, because Congress needs to make sure that the guidance that the administration needs on knowing how to respond to this humanitarian crisis is not only clear but swift, because this is something that will require some congressional action.
And to follow up on
remember the 2008 law is a product of what happened with a 2002 law, which was a product of the court decision in the late 90s that required our government to handle these cases of these children in a different way. The 2008 law is the one that distinguished children and their treatment of those children based on whether they were from a country that was contiguous to the U.S. as opposed to a country that was not contiguous to the U.S. In terms of respecting due process rights, it could easily be argued that if you want to respect due process rights, you should restore to those kids from contiguous countries the same due process rights that kids from non-contiguous countries have. And so rather than argue that, I think most of us would like us to move forward with the President's request and consider, that's why we're here in Congress, to debate and consider any changes that we hope will not only move this forward in the best interest of our country and in the best interest of these children, but do so in a way that continues to show that we respect due process rights, and it makes it clear, sends a clear signal around the world that we will respect due process rights. Yeah.
Last Friday, the Hispanic Caucus said that they were meeting at the White House this week on a variety of immigration issues, including this. Any update on that from the Friday announcement on that?
We're meeting with the president. Yeah. We'll be meeting with him soon. I believe tomorrow we will have an opportunity to meet with him, and we will have that conversation on any number of subjects, but clearly the issue of fixing the broken immigration system, moving forward with something, making sure that if a do-nothing Congress that shuts down a vote on fixing the broken immigration system continues, that the president is prepared to do what he can under the law to try to make our broken immigration system work as best it can, and of course to just continue to work with him and see what we can do to try to help move along a process on the humanitarian crisis at the border with these children so we can keep it going. You hate to say it, but had Republicans allowed us a vote on a common sense fixed immigration reform the way the Senate did over a year ago, we'd already be handling this situation a lot differently. We wouldn't be fretting about the need for more judges to process these cases, the need to provide the Border Patrol with more resources, the need to provide ICE, Customs Enforcement, Immigration and Customs Enforcement with more resources and better tools. We'd already been on the move on doing all of this. And so, once again, we begin to see what happens when you have this do-nothing, shut-down mentality that's taken over the House of Representatives. It keeps you from doing the things the American people expect us to do and from fixing those parts of our system that are broken. Certainly on the immigration side, it's clear. We have a broken set of laws and a system that's broken. We certainly could use a fix, but the only way to really fix this is through a vote through Congress, which is right now being shut down by the House Republican leadership here in the House. Yeah.
Following up on that, what should the president, what do Democrats think the president, specific actions Democrats think the president should do if Congress is unable to agree on a supplemental or any sort of legislative response?
Again, the president's hands are somewhat tied in what he can do without action by Congress, because he's got to work within the confines of the law and with the resources that Congress has provided. And so it's very limited. They've made it very clear to everyone, Republicans and Democrats, senators and members of the House, that the administration will run out of resources to handle this efficiently really soon, because this is not a humanitarian crisis that you budget for a year ago. And so it makes it very difficult to believe that things will get better the longer the House of Representatives fiddles. And so we need to have action. And hoping to hear what the Speaker and his partisan task force reports to him to see if there's any chance of finding consensus, some congruity in how to move forward with the president to get this done. But, you know, money doesn't grow on trees, and people don't work for free, and so we need to take take this seriously. Otherwise, we're going to find ourselves facing a lot more difficult circumstance if we don't tackle this right away. Let's hope that the Speaker and our Republican colleagues will figure out a way to try to work with Democrats here and then bipartisanly as well in the Senate. Let's get something done, show people that we can actually do the work of the American people and do it quickly in their interest. It really would be nice to get to talk more about how we saw the president working with the private sector creating 280,000 jobs last month. We should be focusing on how we get another 280,000 Americans back to work this month and another 280,000 Americans back to work the following month, and just keep it going, and so that our economy brings us the good news that we want to continue to see. We'll take one last question, if there's any. None. Thanks all very much.